So one of my favorite things about this time of year is the stories. I am a sucker for It's Wonderful Life, and I like some of the Hallmarky movies. I prefer the gayer ones recently. um, and like just all the sort of the stories that we tell. And one of my favorites is A Christmas Carol, which I've now done 3 live readings of on my channel. Which, if you like Christmas Carol, you can watch them. They're under the lives. Yeah, I did them with some of my YouTube friends, and you just never seen the Ghost of Christmas Present until you've seen him played by a big bohemian man, and you've seen Jesse Gender dance as Fezziwig, and just everybody was marvelous this year. So yeah, I love this story, and I know it really, really well. And yes, and of course it has issues. Oh, because it's 200 years oldish and was written by a man who was alive 200 years ago and even then had some problematic aspects. And it's okay to acknowledge that because we should always acknowledge the issues with the media we love even as we love it. So, but I want to focus on what I think is wonderful about the story. I see it as a fantasy story. I mean, not just because they're ghosts, but I describe it as like it's a fairy tale about a capitalist facing accountability, which they don't often do in our world. And the thing about fantasy stories is my favorite author, and yeah, bingo cards on Sarah mentions Terry Pratchett. I'm about to mention Terry Pratchett. In his book Hogfather, he talks about what stories mean to humans. Like that fantasy isn't just like a pink pill that makes life bearable. It's the thing that teaches humans to be human, that we need to be human, to be the place where the falling angel meets the rising ape. Love that phrase. And he talks about how we need to believe in the little lies, like the version of Santa and tooth fairies and that sort of thing, so we can learn to believe in what he calls the big lies: truth, duty, justice. The talking about those things about lies is like there is no evidence of them. We have to believe that they're possible in order to try and make them real in the world. Someone else might call that an act of faith. But yeah, I mean, belief in things unseen. We have never seen truth and justice, but we act as if they're possible in the world, and that's important. So, if A Christmas Carol is a fantasy story, what is it telling us about being human, about being falling angel, rising ape? And what are the big lies that it's teaching us to believe? I think that it is a story about accountability and it's a story about community. That's what it's teaching us to be accountable to one another, to build community with one another. So that's the lens through which I want to do a little Christmas book report on Christmas Carol. um, so if that appeals to you, let's dive in.
The Marleys were dead to begin with.
Well, pardon me?
That's how the story begins, Rizzo. The Marleys were dead to begin with.
So Marley was dead to begin with. That's how it always starts. And I think Dickens wants us to understand how alone in the world Marley and Scrooge were, and that without Marley, Scrooge is completely alone. He uses the word soul repeatedly. And then he goes on to start talking a lot about the weather and the coldness. and he gets into just how alone Scrooge is. Draws these alone and cold associations into these solitary as an oyster. We're really belaboring that he is all alone in the world. Although he doesn't actually have to be, because the first voice we hear is Scrooge's only family, his nephew, Fred, who is just warmth and life and everything that Scrooge isn't. And Scrooge, he just tries to shut him down, and Fred yet continues to be cheerful and excited, and in literary terms, he's a foil. Fred is open and lighthearted, and Scrooge is closed and sad and miserable. And Fred loves Christmas, and he gives us what I think is Dickens' thesis of Christmas. And Fred gives us what I think is this story's thesis of Christmas.
There are many things from which I have derived good, by which I have not profited, I dare say, Christmas among the rest. But I am sure I have always thought of Christmas time, when it has come round, apart from the veneration due to its sacred name and origin, if anything belonging to it can be apart from that, as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time, the only time I know of in the long calendar of the year, when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely, and to think of people below them as if they really were fellow passengers to the grave, and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. And therefore, uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe that it has done me good, and will do me good, and I say God bless it.
So he's telling us that Christmas is a good unto itself, whether it provides material benefits or not, and that it's good and kind and charitable. And I think the most important thing to me is that idea about thinking about creatures, about people below them, about one another, not as separate people bound on separate journeys, but as fellow passengers to the grave, as people who are sharing this world. So he's talking about the importance of community and connection, while Scrooge is shutting him down and telling him, no, bah, humbug, none of that matters. And I would note that Dickens draws attention to the sacred name of the origin. I think he's very much giving us Christmas secular as separate from Christmas sacred. The book isn't going to speak to the sacred, what for Christians is the sacred part. Although I think to people who are Christian, that obviously informs the secular part. To me, as an existential humanist, the humans connecting with each other part is in itself sacred. I don't need or ascribe to the other aspect, but I totally respect people who do. So that may inform your reading of the rest. As it probably does to Fred. But I'm going to be focusing on the humanist side because that's me. And I think the text is leaving us the option to connect the two or not to the two. So we have our kind of foils set up that Christmas is the time of connection and open-heartedness and community giving, and Scrooge is, you already know he's cold and miserly and solitary as an oyster. He's alone. And we have a little more setup here with Scrooge snaps at Fred for getting married. And
why ever did you get married?
Why? Because I fell in love.
Scrooge is very scornful of that. So again, we have Scrooge doesn't value connection and doesn't value love. Then he leaves, and we have more setup in this scene when the two charitable gentlemen arrive.
Sir, we are soliciting funds for the indigent and destitute.
For the what? We're collecting for the poor.
And Scrooge's response to the charitable gentleman is rather infamous. First, he tells them he wants to be left alone because we're going to hit that beat again. And then when they try to tell him about, the poor and why they need help, his response is quite infamous.
No prisons?
Plenty of prisons.
And the union workhouses, are they still in operation?
They are. I wish I could say they were not.
And when he is told that some would rather die...
If they would rather die, they'd better do it and decrease the surplus population.
Well, they had better do it and reduce the surplus population. I think this is one of the most monstrous lines in all of literature. What does it mean to think of fellow humans who have just been described to us as fellow travelers on life's journey? Describe these people as surplus population. No, we will not get into you. I don't want to talk about biopower and necropolitics, or we'll never get this done for Christmas. We'll just call him the ghost of leftist videos past and present and future. Yeah. No, we're done with you. We're just going to stick with this little ghost in one idea that Dickens raises for us. That this man who is so alone thinks of people as surplus population. And then he says, but I don't know that people would rather die. And the charitable gentlemen say, well, you might know it. Offering him an opportunity. And Scrooge rejects it, says, this is not my business. A man should mind his own business and leave others alone. And then we get more, atmospheric stuff and how very cold it is because we are setting up what a very cold Scrooge is. And then there he's presented with a little boy singing carols. And again. And then lastly, he has a conversation with Cratchit, who has been there all along, his clerk, who he is so reluctant to give any warmth, any coal, and even reluctant to let him have Christmas Day off, but treats it as picking his pocket. I'm not going to go into every scene as much as that first scene, but I think that scene really sets up the rest of the story because it's really telling us this man is all alone and he is not sharing an inch or anything of himself. And he is just rejected all community and just completely an old miser. But that is only how Scrooge starts. We always talk about Scrooge as if he is always stuck in this state. But he's not, because Scrooge is about to change. But change doesn't come easy. And so the next scene is the call-in. So that night, Marley arrives. Marley, who we know is dead to begin with, arrives to give Scrooge what might be called his call to action. Or his calling in. Because Marley comes, if you know the scene, he's draped in chains. He talks about how all these chains were forged in life by his avarice and greed, and that he might have gone out and helped people, but he didn't. And now he is condemned to walk the earth and to watch over Scrooge with these ponderous chains because he didn't walk forth in life to go and, help. It's really a remarkable sort of indictment of capitalism that we get even before Marx wrote. Marx and Engels hadn't published yet. But, Dickens could see where capitalism was going, as a lot of, was obvious at the time, and the deep wealth inequality. And, this gives us this indictment that, to hoard wealth in a time when others are suffering is a bad thing. And the thing about this scene is Scrooge tries so hard to evade the call-in. We get his whole, you're not real, you're more of gravy than of grave. And can I not have the ghosts? Okay, if I have to have the ghosts, can I have them all at once? There's all sorts of evading attempts. And Marley, like a good calling in person, he's like, no. I mean, usually you don't scream unhinge your jaw and scream in someone's face when you're trying to call them in. But, usually you're not a ghost. But, it is this, no, we're not going to take your bullshit. You're not going to evade the issue. This is how you're living your life. And this is where it could go. And the thing about Marley is he's coming right on Scrooge's level, because he's like, this is how I lived my life. This is how I fucked up. You're going the same way. You're walking around the same way, and you will find out the same way if you don't change your ways. He's not being high-handed about it. He's not like, you should know better, shaking finger. He's like, listen, buddy, I lived this life. I know how this goes. Change your ways. I don't think that everybody who calls out has to have been there and done that, but the idea of actually hearing where someone comes from while you are telling them, hey, buddy, stop. That's a good lesson for how to call people in. And calling in versus calling out. To call out is to do it publicly. To call in is to do it privately. You try and do it privately first. You only call out publicly when it's necessary. Hopefully. And unfortunately, sometimes calling out is necessary. But calling in, you assume that the person wants to be on your side and just needs to be like, hey, what you're doing, path you're going down, wrong path. And that's what Marley's doing. And he's doing it. He's not letting Scrooge get away with no evading. This is your path. You are going to face 3 ghosts. And the 3 ghosts that he faces, as we know, are past, present, and future. So the ghost of Christmas past takes him to his past. The ghost says, I am here for your reclamation. Because at first, again, Scrooge tries to evade it and be like, no, a good sleep would be better for my welfare. Like, no, this is for your reclamation. This is going to make you a better person. It is the call to accountability, to call to looking at what is wrong in your life. That is what was required to make change. You have to look at what went wrong. You have to look at why it went wrong. I love that Dickens first takes us to Scrooge's childhood and makes Scrooge look at himself as a child.
It's me.
What we see is Scrooge feel empathy for the little boy that is himself. So often it is hard for us to have empathy for ourselves. Pity for ourselves, yeah, but empathy for ourselves. And to see, like, especially for our younger selves, and to be like, maybe I didn't have what I needed to have to learn to do this right the first time. That's what we see of Scrooge. He's being left alone at Christmas. Before he made himself alone at Christmas, he was left alone at Christmas. But he doesn't just stay empathizing with himself. He immediately makes the connection to that little boy who was singing a carol. When he has empathy for himself, he can see himself in that boy. And it's the first connection he makes. Himself as a little boy to the little boy that he dismissed, and he regrets doing that. And then Scrooge watches someone seek connection with him. And it's Fred's mother, his little sister. And he sees the joy that gives his little self to have someone reach out and make that connection. And the spirit is kind of like, so, she was a mother, wasn't she?
She died a married woman and had, I think, children.
What a child.
True, your nephew.
There's someone else who's been offering you connection, and you rejected it. And so we get Scrooge starts to regret that. And then we go to his youth and apprenticeship, and he sees the way that Fezziwig was a good employer and what his generosity meant.
And yet, what does this party cost him in your mortal money? 3 or 4 pounds at most. Is that so much that he deserves your praise?
Oh, but it's not that. The happiness he gave to us, his clerks and apprentices, and everybody who knew him, was as great as if it had cost a fortune.
Fezziwig's generosity doesn't just make Scrooge's life better and Fezziwig's life better, but the whole neighborhood is there. There's a whole community. He's starting to recognize, and he clocks Cratchit, that he had an opportunity to be generous and he missed it. He is missing the chance to have community. He could make someone else's life better the way that Fezziwig made his life better. He's learning. And then we see the, Belle breaking up with him part where, she points out that he has changed. And she, says that his worship of money has changed him. And that he has turned away from her. And so he's watching the consequences of his actions, being that he wasn't connecting, and so he lost. And then there's a scene which I honestly cut when I do my reading, and I think a lot of people cut, where the ghost takes him to Belle's, life, her the man she did marry and her family and all that. I cut it because it gets a little weird. Dickens gets a little overindulgent with his descriptions of the women, and it's a bit voyeuristic. And that I explain why I cut it, and most people cut it for the it's not really necessary. But when has that ever stopped Dickens? But still, we could say he's watching the connection that he could have had, the family he could have had, the community he could have had. And that is too much for him. And he tries to put out the spirit, put out the memories. Which is when he meets the ghost of Christmas Present.
Come in and know me better, man. I am the spirit of Christmas Present.
Come in and know me better, man. Did I already say that?
And Present shows him the way that everybody else is celebrating Christmas. And Dickens goes on and on at length. But what he's showing repeatedly is people connecting. People who are rich, people who are poor. And Dickens goes on and on because honestly, Chucky Boy just could not finish sentences. We just got to describe everything in every shop. And I'm going to try not to do that. But what's the Christmas Present is showing him is all the people who are making connections, who are deciding that it's worth not fighting over little things, who are out in the cold, but making do, who are poor, and yet still making connections and finding the best that they can. But he's also definitely showing that people, are struggling. And that's when he takes Scrooge to Cratchit's house and shows, here is a family making the best they possibly can out of a tiny Christmas meal. And Scrooge is the founder of that feast. That's what Bob calls him.
I give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast.
So Scrooge is the reason that it is a small feast. And this is when we have the bit about Tiny Tim and him recognizing, in the conditions they live, because of Bob's meager salary, that they live in such meager conditions that if things don't change, Tiny Tim will die. And I think that Scrooge connects with him not just because he's, a small child with a crutch, but because his first connection of empathy was in connecting with himself as a little boy. Now he's seeing another little boy who is alone for a different reason. And this is where the Ghost of Christmas Present throws his most infamous line back at him.
If he'd be like to die, he'd better do it and decrease the surplus population.
And the ghost pulls his feet to the fire.
Man, if man you be in heart, not adamant, forbear that wicked cant until you have discovered what the surplus is and where it is. Will you decide what men shall live and what men shall die? It might be that in the sight of heaven you are more worthless and less fit to live than millions like this poor man's child. Oh God, to hear the insect on the leaf pronouncing on the too much life among his hungry brothers in the dust.
And this is where I come to this video's not a sponsor. Are you a person who cares about other people as human people and not as a surplus population? Do you have a feeling heart? Well, have you heard about calling for a ceasefire now? Do you wish to stop other human beings being treated as a surplus population and left to die? Well, luckily for you, there is something you can do. It is called taking any action. You can use your body on a picket line to call for a ceasefire. You can use your money by contributing to aid, or use your refusal to give money by participating in the BDS movement that will give you clear instructions on a targeted boycott. You can use your voice by contacting your representatives. You can do something to help your fellow humans who are being left by the thousands to die. This is available for the low, low price of taking some kind of action. A reminder that the actions taken by the government of Israel are not representative of persons of the Jewish faith around the world. They are representative of the individuals in charge of the Israeli government and those people supporting them, enabling them, and keeping them in power, also supplying them with weapons. Be sure to keep your actions focused on those actually responsible for this through their actions or inactions. This, again, has been brought to you by taking some kind of action for a ceasefire so people stop dying. And now we return to Scrooge having his ass handed to him. It is at this moment that Bob makes the toast to Scrooge, calling him the founder of the feast, which Bob means kindly, because Bob is kind and generous and still cares about people. But we can also read as, he is the founder of this small feast. And Mrs. Cratchit is the first living person to push back.
It could only be on Christmas Day that I would drink the health of such a hard, stingy, and badly dressed, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge. You know he is, Robert. Nobody knows it better than you do, poor fellow.
And I love her for it. She still goes in with, okay, for your sake in Christmas days, but Scrooge gets to hear that someone wants to give him a piece of their mind.
And I bet he would choke on it. Choke.
From there, the ghost takes him all around the world to see how various people, again, are celebrating how much or how little they have. And it's all about people making connections with each other. And then we see Fred, who has the most generous catching laughter, because we're talking again, making connections. And Fred talks about how even if Scrooge will never listen, he is going to keep trying. Because he believes it is worth the effort, even if Scrooge only budges the tiny bit, he still believes it is worth trying. So again, we have our Stater of the Christmas thesis reiterating that, it is worth making the connection. It is worth trying. And Scrooge also gets to see what kind of connection he could have been having all this time. He gets to participate in games and all the fun of Christmas. Because when people let you into their community has fun. Even if, however much you have, people will find ways to connect and to make fun and enjoyable things. The reason I started doing this Christmas read along to the Christmas Carol, it was in 2020 when we were all stuck alone, and my friends and I clearly needed something. And so I said, let's do this. And yeah, we didn't have to be in the same space. We were separated. We were all over the world, and we still came together and had fun. And every year that's what we do. We, come together, have fun, and share a story. Because trying to connect is worth it. Scrooge is being offered connection by family, but it doesn't have to be family. You can always, sometimes family isn't the people you want to connect with. But connecting with people is good. And again, the connection, these connections that Scrooge has been making have gotten him to think about his misdeeds, think about what it has cost him to be ungenerous and what it has cost the people around him.
An unwanted creature, but not a rat-a-leech or a cockroach.
Then what?
Then what?
What?
It's Ebenezer Scrooge.
Yes.
More on that with the next ghost. Because it is not enough to want to change. It is not enough to be called in. It is not enough to understand that there are things you're missing. It is not enough to want to change. You have to actually do it. And this being a story, the Ghost of Christmas Future gets to show Scrooge what will happen if he doesn't change. But before we get to the last spirit, there's a bit you will not have seen if you've only seen versions that are okay for kids. But there's this scene where the Ghost of Christmas Present lifts up his robe, and we see that even at even Christmas, this time of plenty and joy and everything, there is still want, because we have these two skeletal creatures that are kids who are emaciated, and he says they are man's children, they're humans' children.
They are man's. They cling to me for protection from their fetters. This boy is ignorance, this girl is want. Beware them both, but most of all, beware this boy.
So, he's saying even at Christmas time, there are still people who go hungry, and there are still people who, live in ignorance. And
but have they no refuge, no resource? Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses?
So yeah, even though Scrooge has done all this learning and seen all this stuff and is ready to connect and open up, he's in that moment being thrown back in his face. What the results of his refusal to be charitable, the results of his wealth hoarding, is he, among all of humanity, is responsible for wanton ignorance. Not subtle. And then we get to Christmas Future, who is going to show him what life would be like if he makes no changes. And it's what life would be. It's not what life would be like. Actually, it's what death would be like. It is, people just don't really care. The people in his life, that he worked with every day, have no reason to care. They'll go to his funeral if lunch is provided. And Scrooge is, of course, in denial that it's him they're talking about, but it's pretty obvious. It's just like, obviously he is in denial about, that the extent of changes that he really has to make to his life. And then, we get the scene in Old Joe the pawnbroker's to be just, subtle as a bag of hammers. This is the end of it, you see. He frightened everyone away from him when he was alive to profit us when he was dead. So yeah, not subtle, but the point is made. And he's like, I want to see someone who has emotions about this death. And he has shown a couple who are relieved that they have a bit of a reprieve because he's not calling in the mortgage. And that's the only feeling anyone can have about his death. And then the spirit takes him to Cratchit's house, and we see how even in death, Tiny Tim is loved. Even in such a short life where he owned nothing but a crutch, he is still deeply loved. And we have the contrast of Scrooge's body, which we've seen in nothing but a shroud, where we know that people have stripped him of everything and left him alone because he was alone in life, so he is alone now. And Tiny Tim, his body, is surrounded by candles and family who sit with him. And they talk about how they will always remember this first parting.
Life is made up of meetings and partings. That is the way of it. I am sure we shall never forget Tiny Tim or this first parting that there was among us.
This tiny little life of a boy who owned nothing is worth so much more than Scrooge's long life of wealth hoarding. Then he, we go to the grave so he can finally stop lying to himself that the body was his. And so on our accountability journey, we looked at the past where Scrooge learned to empathize by, feeling for himself and connecting that feeling with other people. And with seeing how people have tried to connect with him and where he has rejected that. And when we see the future and all the opportunities that he is missing out, and the way that his lack of generosity is leaving others cold and, suffering in ways that he could alleviate easily. And then future, see, this is the results if you don't change your ways. You will die. You will die anyway, but in this way, you will die and no one will care because you will have done nothing good in the world if you don't connect with people, if you don't seek community, if you don't care for the other people in the world as fellow passengers in this life, as fellows in this life who are as worthy of life as you and not surplus population. And then he wakes up and he is given the opportunity to make changes. Because it isn't enough to reckon with what you've done, even if you really do reckon with what you've done and not try to avoid it, but actually reckon with how your actions have harmed people and then how your actions came about, how they harm people, and how they will harm you. To actually make a change, you actually have to make a change. And so that's what the final stave is. It begins with him reaching out to a boy. And it's usually, in most adaptations, the boy that we see at the beginning is the boy that we see at the end when he says,
Today? Well, today is Christmas Day.
Scrooge, this is the first person he's connecting with. He's like, oh, it's a marvelous boy. You're a wonderful boy. And he's connecting, again, just like he connected with the seeing himself. And his first act is to be generous to the boy, by being generous to Cratchit, by sending Cratchit food. And then to go out in the world and make connections and to find the charitable gentleman and offer back payment, taking action for generosity. And he's not wanting to take credit for it. He's recognizing that this is what he should have done all along. And he refuses credit for it. And he promises that they will come and he will give more. And, he's setting up plans for the future. And then he goes and connects with Fred. And then we see that it is not only that day, because the next day he sits down and talks with Bob about to have a better arrangement. And Dickens tells us that he was as good as his word.
And, Tiny Tim?
Tiny Tim, who did not die?
Oh, isn't that swell?
Tiny Tim did not die because, generosity helped. I mean, Victorian children died so easily. So warmth and food can help a lot.
Scrooge was better than his word. He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city ever knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world.
And also that he had no further intercourse with spirits, which is a line I would like to hit because sometimes it's fun how language changes over the generations. So yeah, we've seen this course of how a person takes accountability by recognizing, where he's gone wrong, by learning to empathize, by learning to connect, and then by acting on that, desire for community, going out and actually forging those connections. And through that, he makes a better life for himself and those around him. Not hoarding his resources or hoarding himself. He is not solitary as an oyster. But he's someone who has said that if anyone in the good old city knew how to celebrate Christmas, it was him. So yeah, if Christmas is the thesis of this story is telling us, if this Christmas is connection and community, then he became someone who could do community. And so I think we're talking about like the big lies and the little lies that we have to learn to believe in. Empathy, we could say, is kind of one of those Pratchettian lies. We don't see evidence of other people. We don't see other people's feelings and internal world like that. We don't get to be shown our past and our present and our future in this way. But through stories, we can learn to believe about the connections. We can learn to believe in empathy and the importance of seeing oneself in another. The importance in seeing that no matter how different people are, they are not surplus population. No one is ever surplus population. And community, in a sense, kind of is one of those big lies. If you ground up the world into the finest powder and sieved it through the finest sieve, would there be one atom of community that you could show me? And yet we must believe in it. Because how else can we create it? And so I believe, although I cannot show you a molecule of community or find it on a map, that it has done me good and will do me good. And so I choose to embrace it.
And I say, God bless it.
Yeah.
So that was my thoughts on Christmas and community and stuff. And, I hope all of you have community in some form this Christmas. And I know that there are places you can reach out if you don't. And also, like, there are people probably in your life who might want to hear from you. See if someone wants to watch a movie with you or something. I want to thank the people who have been community to me. To those of you who watch and leave wonderful comments, and to my fellow YouTubers who joined me to make the Christmas Carol. And I hope we can all collectively believe in community and make it true. And in the name of community, I'm going to read out all the names of my Patreon supporters. And I hope I will pronounce them properly. Please let me know if I pronounce them wrong and how to do it right. Angela Delgado, Tari Young, Bonnie, Jen, Jessica Warren, Kaylee Cruz, Christine Sprague, Rochelle Delaney, Thimble Rowe, Alex, Anya, Beth Agostino, Charlie Brown, Constance McKenzie, David, Dominica K, Foreign Man in a Foreign Land, Grace, Katie, Kira, Lessa W, Lulu Bell, Mag, Mixter, Ophelia Sullivan, Sidekick, Yozoriel Swan. So that is everybody, and I appreciate you all so much. And I hope to have more videos for you in the coming year. I hope you are all doing well and enjoying the holidays that you celebrate, or just enjoying your people. And of course, any of you can join my Patreon if you so choose. The link is in the description, or you can do the tippy thing with the coffee or PayPal.